Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I'd review this little video that I thought would be very particularly interesting. And I wanted, to review this little video. I believe that the channel name is Hitman Sports Media. And I wanted to review this because, of course, I believe that he ended up commenting on my video, not too long ago. But on top of that, of course, the reason why he commented on my video was because I ended up reviewing a video, of his, of course, right before that of the Saul Canelo Alvarez versus Terrence Bud Crawford fight. And of course, let me give the man a great amount of credit. He predicted Terrence Bud Crawford to win the fight. He got the fight prediction correct. And let me give, anyone who got their fight prediction correct certainly a great round of applause because I did not personally believe that Crawford was going to win the fight. It's not that, of course, that I did not state that. I thought the fights couldn't go either way, especially after taking a look at Canelo Alvarez's most recent performance. But I did have to favor Canelo Alvarez, especially not knowing how Terrence Bud Crawford was going to handle the weight, handle the power, and how fast he was going to look, especially being out for over a year, and, of course, being damn near 38 years old. I was not quite sure how he was going to be able to handle Canelo Alvarez, but he was able to handle Canelo Alvarez and quite clearly beat him. I do think that, of course, that Canelo made it relatively competitive, but nowhere near competitive enough to where obviously he had an argument to win the fight. I thought that he landed some good shots and, got his licks in, but, he just very obviously could not do anything with Terrence Bud Crawford. And let me give once again this gentleman overall a certain amount of credit here. I thought that I would review this video because I thought that he brought up a certain amount of great points, about kind of the post-fight aftermath. But on top of that, there were also some points that I ended up disagreeing with, that I thought that I would kind of talk about as well. I was going to review another video, but the question mainly is about this video is, was Canelo Alvarez, a quote-unquote shot fighter against that of a Terrence Bud Crawford? And Terrence Bud Crawford, of course, this win meant so much to his career because when I compare Terrence Bud Crawford overall, to certain athletes, he's almost, if I were going to compare him to certain athletes across that of other sports, he's almost very similar to that of a Shaquille O'Neal, to that of a Joe Montana to a degree, a Khabib Nurmagomedov, and of course in boxing that of a Rocky Marciano. And the reason why I compare him to some of those athletes is because if you weren't really around during that era, and if you take a look at those guys today, you wouldn't really be impressed, especially with some of the other guys' resumes or their accomplishments. People will take a look at Shaquille O'Neal today and say, well, he has 4 championships, but he really had Kobe Bryant, and Kobe Bryant won 5 rings, and he was someone that was great, but he only has 1 MVP. And Shaquille O'Neal, of course, he was someone that did underachieve a little bit, but it shows you how great he actually was to win 4 NBA championships and pretty much be the most dominant force that anyone had ever seen in those, in that early 2000s, final series. Shaquille O'Neal was someone that, for those of you that were not around during the era or at least don't know the history of it, Shaquille O'Neal, and I was relatively young, of course, but, I would do research on it later. Shaquille O'Neal was someone that was literally averaging like 38 points per game with like over 20 rebounds. The dude was an absolute monster in that of the playoffs. And then, of course, when you take a look at that of other athletes that I mentioned, Joe Montana, in my personal view, is the second greatest quarterback of all time. But of course, a certain amount of people, they take a look at Joe Montana today and they say, well, you know what? This guy never even had an official 4,000-yard throwing season. He was someone that was a little bit overrated. I'd pick Aaron Rodgers over him. I'd pick some of these guys over him. And he's someone that, in terms of the throwing yards, may not have quite as much. But in terms of everything else for his day, he had the highest passing percentage. He had the highest touchdown to interception ratio. And then on top of that, of course, he won the most amount of MVPs. I believe at 2 MVPs. And then, of course, he obviously made that dynasty run. Of course, he had help with Jerry Rice and, a certain amount of other guys, But the point is that Joe Montana, a lot of the times today, especially when people either of my generation or a younger generation kind of look at it, I don't think that they really give Joe Montana the credit that he deserves. And it's very similar overall, with certain guys like that of a Terrence Bud Crawford, who reminds me so much of that of a Rocky Marciano. When people take a look at Terrence Bud Crawford, they take a look at him and say, you know what? He doesn't really have that much of a resume. Canelo was a bit older. Errol Spence, of course, had the car accident. Sean Porter wasn't a champion. And I mean, we can say these things if we want to. They are a part of the situation. But I do believe that Terrence Bud Crawford still beat them when they were at a great point in their career. I don't think that Canelo necessarily was at the absolute peak, of course, because, of course, we had seen that he was starting to go downhill a little bit even for the past few years. But that being stated, it's not like Terrence Bud Crawford was a spring chicken either. He was someone that, once again, was 38 years old. He was someone that was moving up multiple weight classes. So my point is this, very similar to that of a Rocky Marciano, Terrence Bud Crawford is someone that when you take a look at his resume, he may not have the most extensive resume of all time, but some of the wins that he does have, they do deserve the utmost amount of respect, especially his victories over that of a Spence and a Canelo Alvarez, and of course even his wins over Yuriorkis Gamboa, Victor Postol, and Israel Madrimov. There might be another one, in there that I'm forgetting. Sean Porter, of course, let me not forget him. Those are the 6 A-grade level wins in Crawford's career. Of course, when we compare Rocky Marciano, he's not someone that has the most amount of A-grade level wins either. But of course, anyone that knows me knows that I put Rocky Marciano to a very, very high level degree. I put him in some of the greatest conversations of all time. No, he did not always fight guys when they were necessarily a spring chicken, but guys like that of Ezra Charles and Jersey Joe Walcott, they still were clear A-grade level fighters, if not at the best point in their career when Rocky Marciano had fought them. Let me also not forget Archie Moore. Archie Moore was in his early 40s, I believe, but he still was someone that, overall was a very dangerous light heavyweight fighter, I believe, and he really was the same size as Rocky Marciano. People don't know, but Rocky was really one of the most undersized heavyweight fighters, even of his era of all time. He was like 5'10.5" with like a 67-inch arm reach. He was damn near the size of Miguel Cotto. So, I mean, it just is what it is, at least in terms of height and reach. But the point overall is that, this gentleman here, he brought up a certain amount of good points and certain points that I also disagreed with. But I thought that, of course, it would be good to bring both perspectives to the table. And, of course, this is going to have to be remembered as the Terrence Bud Crawford era, or at least definitely over that of a Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez, of course, in my view, it will be remembered as somewhat of his era, but never again will it ever be remembered as the Canelo Alvarez era, at least as the main guy. He might be remembered up there like kind of how Tommy Hearns is remembered with Sugar Ray Leonard and Hagler and Duran and certain guys like that, but never again will it ever be remembered as his main generation. It just is what it is, and it doesn't deserve to be. At the end of the day, you didn't just lose to Crawford, but you also lost to Mayweather. And the Bivol fight, I can kind of, give you a valid excuse for that, but at the end of the day, you did outweigh both Mayweather and Crawford, probably to a certain degree. It just is what it is. You outweighed Mayweather by 20 pounds, and Crawford, although Crawford definitely is more comparable in size to Canelo than what a Mayweather is, at the end of the day, he still did lose. And Crawford was moving up 2 weight classes that he had never been to before, and he was 38 years old, and he was someone that, obviously, I think that he probably was at a slightly better point in his career. But once again, he's not someone that is at the absolute peak of his career either. So this meant a lot to Canelo Alvarez, and unfortunately for him, he lost. It is what it is. But that being stated, let's see what the gentleman has to say. Let's get straight into it.
What's going on, you guys? So, I pretty much called it. I knew once Terrence Crawford beat Canelo Alvarez that there was going to be a lot of people coming out with excuses for Canelo Alvarez for why he loses the fight. And sure enough, it's not even a week past when the fight happened, right? Like, it just happened last weekend, but we're Thursday right now. So what is that? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 5 days. We're 5 days past the fight, and we're seeing a lot of people come out now making excuses for Canelo Alvarez. And Canelo is getting all this praise for, not making excuses, right? People are saying, oh, he's, accepted the loss like a man, like a champion, but in the post-fight interview, he says he just physically couldn't do anything. He wanted to, but he physically couldn't respond to what...
I didn't really take a look at Canelo Alvarez in the post-fight aftermath. I'm not really someone that oftentimes takes a look at the post-fight interviews, but I would have to see. But from what I had seen, Canelo Alvarez has stated that he thought that Crawford was just a little bit too good, but maybe he did state that. Now, maybe that was his way of saying that, Crawford just did certain things that I cannot handle. Or maybe that was Canelo Alvarez's way of saying that I just cannot react the same way physically anymore. Probably a little bit of both, and I think that there is a little bit of truth in both of those sentiments. But the thing is that Terrence Bud Crawford, of course, was moving up in weight a couple of weight classes. If Canelo Alvarez was the true better fighter compared to that of a Terrence Bud Crawford, he should have been able to win, but he wasn't able to.
Terrence Crawford, was bringing in the ring. And I'm paraphrasing here, but I can't recall exactly what he said, but he said something along those lines where his body just told him no. He just couldn't do it no more, right? And that's exactly what we've heard from multiple people now. Boxing experts, boxing pundits, trainers, fighters have come out and, defended Canelo Alvarez. And it's funny enough that some of these guys that are defending him now were actually picking Canelo Alvarez to win this fight. One of them being Jose Benavidez Sr., who's just a complete hater through and through.
Well, I need to see what Jose Benavidez is necessarily saying to quantify him as a quote-unquote hater. Now, I understand overall if he was, not giving Terrence Bud Crawford any credit, but I mean, we'll see. Once again, I would have to take a look at his interview. But that being stated overall, I mean, there are certain pundits saying that Canelo Alvarez just didn't look the same, but to be quite honest with you, the majority of the pundits that I see, they pretty much just stated overall that Crawford was the better fighter, at least from what I've seen. Max Kellerman, Timothy Bradley, certain other guys. Now, of course, some of these guys, of course, have been good with Crawford for a while, so maybe I'm missing some of the other guys, but, I'd have to see. I'm sure there are some pundits, of course, either making excuses or that hold the belief that Canelo just was a shot fighter. I don't think that Canelo Alvarez was a shot fighter. Of course, I don't think that he was at his peak, but the point overall is that, I don't think that Crawford was either. So the point is that there's only so many excuses that I think we can really make for Canelo Alvarez when at the end of the day, Crawford is 38. I understand that he had over a year to kind of grow up his body, which could have either A, worked against him or B, worked for him. But the point overall is that, Crawford just showed that he was the better fighter compared to Canelo, and he just could not do much against Crawford.
Came out, right, before the fight happened and said, oh, Bud's too small, he's a little guy, and the fight's going to look like the Charlo fight with Canelo, and, he may get stopped or whatever. He might be on his bike. He's not no Floyd Mayweather. He said a lot of things, right? But he's one of the first ones to come out.
Well, just because someone says that of Terrence Bud Crawford that that he believes that he's going to be on his bike like Jermell Charlo and that he's not Mayweather, I mean, to me, that's not necessarily quote-unquote hating on a fighter. To me, what hating on a fighter is that overall, you state that this fighter is going to lose and all this other stuff and that he's going to get exposed. And then the minute the result doesn't end up going your way, then you try to take every ounce of credit away from him. Now, that being stated, if Jose Benavidez is trying to do that, then yeah, he might be a Terrence Bud Crawford hater. But just because overall he states that he believes Crawford is going to lose, doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be a hater.
And say, you know what? Canelo Alvarez, he's just had some wars, he even said his body couldn't respond to what he quoted Canelo and what he said at the press conference, right? He defended Canelo, which is very surprising because he obviously hates on Canelo too because his son never got the opportunity.
Well, as to overall the reaction or what my reaction would be about Canelo's body just couldn't respond, I didn't really see that off of Canelo Alvarez, at least not to the same degree. I mean, of course, do I think that he looked relatively slow compared to what he used to be? Sure. But at the end of the day, once again, he still looked good enough in my view to where he could have potentially won the fight had he tried, a little bit more to get in Crawford's grill, but he just could not do it. And it was very obvious that in the early part of the fight that the lead hand, that it was such a problem for Canelo Alvarez. And he was very dismayed by Canelo Alvarez's lead hand. He had such a problem with it. He was really not doing as much in terms of pressure as what he needed to be. And he was just being a little bit too patient. And I stated that if Canelo was going to lose, it's more than likely overall A, because he's not able to hit Crawford enough, obviously. And on top of that, he's not throwing enough. Very similar to that of a Hagler, versus that of a Leonard situation. I believe that Crawford threw 100 more punches than that of a Canelo Alvarez. And Canelo was still somewhat in the fight. I believe that he was the more accurate fighter of the two fighters according to the punch stats. But the point overall is that, Canelo just, he needed to either throw just as much as Crawford in this fight or possibly throw more than him. He was not going to win the fight, in my personal view, if A, Crawford was able to handle the weight well, combined with the fact that Canelo Alvarez just was not able to throw as much as him. And it was obvious that Canelo, that he had a problem with that reach, so he had to maneuver around his lead hand, which he did a good job of doing in the first half of the fight, but he was not used to maneuvering around such an educated lead hand and someone that was so comparable with him in terms of height. So he had to maneuver in a way that he was not used to in a very long time. Certain people overall, once again, they may take a look at a fighter fighting a bigger fighter and think that it's a disadvantage for the smaller guy. Well, it can be, but if you know what you're doing, then at times it can be an advantage, because if that guy overextends, or if they overall have the longer reach, then basically what that means is that, there are certain breaks that you can kind of take off, because you don't have to maneuver quite as much, because those guys, they may land certain hits, but it's harder for them because they're taller and lengthier for them to get to your body.
Opportunity to step in the ring with Canelo. Terrence Crawford did. Lonnie, I don't even know this dude's name. What's his name? Lonnie B. A guy I've seen, pop up on, a couple boxing YouTube channels throughout the years. I believe he's a former, or, he might be even a current fighter. Super middleweight. I looked him up on BoxRec some time ago, but the dude's a bum. He picked Canelo to win the fight. And
Lonnie B is someone that, at times gets good predictions, but at other times, he kind of misses. He's one of those people overall that either hit a home run or strike out.
Here we are.
At least if I'm thinking of the same guy.
He does a video reacting to the fight, and he says, Canelo's just overrated. He just really wasn't that good, and he just, was very popular.
And that definitely overall is a quote-unquote hater. Whenever overall there is a fighter that ends up losing, and once again, this is the reason why I reviewed Aki TV's, video as well, because now all of a sudden all these people that have been hating on Canelo for years, calling him overrated and all this other stuff, now all of a sudden, because they want Crawford to be top 5 or top 10 of all time, all of a sudden now Canelo is the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. Like, what happened to Canelo Alvarez not even being on the level of Barrera and Morales? So, like I always state, I'm not someone that, overall gets emotional about any of these subjects, but all I ask is consistency. That being stated, Aki TV is never going to bring consistency to the table. We already know that. But I'm someone that does that. So once again, that's why, overall, I do not make excuses, overall, unless I think there's a really valid excuse. But anyway.
Fighter, he got, everything handed to him, right? Defending Canelo, taking away from Terrence Crawford's win. But it doesn't surprise me at all, because like I said, I called it. But Stephen Breadman Edwards came out, and said, oh man, he's just had too many wars, he's had around 70 fights, he's been fighting for 20 years, blah, 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 and this, that, and the other, which I don't know what Stephen Breadman Edwards, reasoning for trying to discredit his win would be. Maybe it's because Caleb Plant got stopped by Canelo Alvarez, and that was actually the last time Canelo stopped anybody was when he fought Caleb Plant, and he's just trying to, maybe not make Caleb Plant look too bad, because he came up short and a guy coming from welterweight didn't.
Well, Terrence Bud Crawford was coming up from 154. That being stated, of course, we all know that Terrence Bud Crawford, that he only had one fight there, so I'll give Crawford a little bit of leeway. But what I'll personally also state is this: Crawford handled the weight a lot better than what I thought he was going to. So it might be possible that Crawford is even a little bit more of a natural 154 pounder, but that being stated, I'm not going to really go that far. Crawford is someone that, in my view, is around a natural 147 pounder. He's a bit bigger, than some of the guys there at average. One could debate that maybe he is around a natural, 154 pounder. But the point is that if Canelo was truly the better fighter, he would have been able to win the fight.
Or it could be him, being a Philly dude, just trying to discredit Crawford, because he's a big Boots fan. I don't know. That's my opinion. I could be wrong, but he did pick Crawford to win the fight. So I don't know why he would come out and discredit him.
That definitely is a little bit odd. I'm kind of wondering that myself. I'm not quite sure if, I'm not quite sure. I haven't seen Stephen, Breadman Edwards. I haven't really seen him say anything about Boots, so maybe, maybe. But I mean, maybe he just seen something in Canelo that, he thought that he was washed. I'm not quite sure. I'm not going to claim that he's hating on Crawford, because it appears that, he's always liked Crawford. But that being said, sometimes you think someone likes somebody and then they kind of come out with how they actually feel, and it turns out to be the complete opposite.
But nonetheless, this was gonna happen, and I'm sure we haven't heard the last of the excuses. I'm sure there's gonna be more stuff. They're probably gonna come out and say some things about his gloves or that he was on steroids.
Well, listen, at the at the end of the day, I've already mentioned that Terrence Bud Crawford being without the snack program and all those athletes, no matter who they are, and let me mention guys like Virgil Ortiz and Bam Bam Rodriguez as well, because I know I'm gonna get some of these guys in there saying, why aren't you mentioning, the Latino, like all this are bullshit. Listen, anyone who is with the snack program, in my view, they are very possibly on steroids. That's just my personal view of it. And I know overall that, people are not going to agree. They're going to say, well, stop saying that overall when Canelo Alvarez was the one who was caught. Listen, at the end of the day, just because Canelo Alvarez was the one that was officially caught on steroids does not possibly mean that Crawford and the guys at the snack program are not also possibly on steroids. At the end of the day, Terrence Bud Crawford, he works with somebody in Victor Conte, who is someone that was not framed. He was officially caught for being an official PED supplier to world level athletes. And he has stated himself on the record that he knows overall how to get around certain drug tests to make sure that they do not come up positive. So at the end of the day, if you think that guys like Crawford or Andrade or Ortiz or Bam Bam Rodriguez are going to work with the snack program and that there's not going to be levels of suspicions, I mean, come on. At the end of the day, Frank Sinatra, for example, had quote unquote indirect ties overall with the mob. Well, at the end of the day, if you sit down with the mob, you can overall once again get, quizzical when people take a look at you and wonder if you have an association with them. At the end of the day, Terrence Bud Crawford has an association with Victor Conte. And until he splits up from him, or until all those athletes split up from him, those allegations are always going to be flying around. It is what it is.
It's just, it never ends. This is a reoccurring thing for whoever Terrence Crawford fights. From Earl Spence to Sean Porter to Kell Brook, Amir Khan, Jeff Horn. Like, there's always something with whoever he beats. Victor Postal, Ricky Burns.
Well, although I do slightly agree with him overall there, that there oftentimes has been always something. The thing also with Crawford's career, which is why once again I also compare him to that of a Rocky Marciano, is because once again when we take a look at guys like Kell Brook and Amir Khan, he's not someone, those are not two fighters that were at the peak of their career. I'm sorry, it just is what it is. That being stated, Crawford was still able to beat them in a better fashion than what most other fighters did. But I mean, the point is that they just were not at peak level. It is what it is. Kell Brook had already suffered major, stoppages at that time. He suffered he didn't even just get stopped quick in those fights. Like he suffered literal beatdowns against that of Gennady Golovkin and Errol Spence, where he broke both orbital eye bones, and he was in a couple of fights after that against bums, really, and he was very visibly never the same. It just is what it is, and Amir Khan, he was someone overall that right before the Crawford fight, he got knocked out against Canelo, was never the same, got knocked down like once or twice by Samuel Vargas of all people. They just, those fighters were not the same. And I mean, Jeff Horn is someone that, of course, got that win over Manny Pacquiao, but first of all, A, how many people really truly believe that he really deserved to win that fight? Then B, when it comes down to it, do any of us really believe that he would have beat any of the other top welterweights in that division? He pretty much was a one-hit wonder, and that really was about it. He had his James Buster Douglas moment, and then pretty much from then on, he pretty much was exposed what he was always meant to be, which was a B-grade level fighter. He was a very good B-grade level fighter, but he was never someone that was ever going to be A-class. So, I mean, it is what it is. But that being stated, you still have to give Crawford credit for beating someone that still beat Manny Pacquiao. Pacquiao was a bit older, but he still was someone that, was accomplishing great things, before and after that. So you still have to give him great credit, But that being stated, Crawford does, have a decent resume. He doesn't have the most amount of A-grade level names in his career, just is what it is. But, after this Canelo Alvarez win, it's going to catapult his career up, to the all-time great level in terms of certain guys like a Leonard, a Mayweather, and certain guys like that, as it should.
You name them, there's an excuse for why he beat him, or they just never were that good. All right? This has been the story of Crawford's career, but nonetheless, dude, you have to give him credit no matter what.
Well, here's what I'll say about Terrence Bud Crawford. I give him full-on credit for defeating Gamboa and Postal and Porter and Spence and Majimov and Canelo Alvarez. I give them full A grade level credit for those fighters. I just don't think that Brook nor Amir Khan were at A grade levels. I'm sorry, but it just is what it is. Jeff Horn, I also do not believe he was ever an A grade level fighter. And to be honest with you, I don't think that and the other fighters that he fought either were A grade level, but who knows? Maybe they would have beat someone had they had the opportunity to really fight someone elite at that time, but we'll never know.
You have to give him credit no matter what. This is the best fighter of this era, possibly of all time.
I agree. Terrence Bud Crawford is going to have to be remembered, of this era. He may share it with that of an Alexander Usyk, of course, because Usyk is also undisputed in 2 separate weight classes. Now, of course, Crawford is also undisputed in 3 separate weight classes, not just 2 anymore. But, when it comes down to what Usyk, of course, was able to do something that, is going to be remembered for a while, because he really was not supposed to do what he was supposed to do. And he probably, was even more outsized than what a Terrence Bud Crawford was, at least in the biggest fight of his career against the Tyson Fury. And Fury is someone that is a phenomenal level, not just heavyweight, but super heavyweight. But that being stated, if you were to have Terrence Bud Crawford as the clear best of this era, I don't think overall that it's a slight at Usyk or that, it's unbelievable. But I do think that Usyk will have a mention there as well. And Usyk, in my view, after all he's accomplished, he's pretty much up there with, a lot of the heavyweights, and he's above any cruiserweight that I've ever seen. Personally, I don't even think it's close. But I mean, when you talk about the heavyweights, he's up there with certain guys like, at least in terms of all-around ability and peak level, he's up there with guys like Lennox Lewis and, Ali and certain guys like that, just in my view. But when you take a look overall at accomplishments even, in my view, he can even be right there with guys like Foreman and Frazier and certain guys like that. And I know that certain guys that they're not going to like that, but, it just is what it is. When we take a look at those guys' accomplishments, it's really not quite as impressive as what some people would let on.
And it's not even really close of this era. I don't understand how anybody can say anybody else is the best fighter in this era.
You could debate Alexander Usyk in my personal view, but pretty much any other fighter, no. I mean, of course, some other people would debate Inoue, but the problem is with Inoue is that he's a little bit more of a tweener, as I've already mentioned. He's not really completely a part of this generation. He has several more years in his career, so I think that his career is going to be kind of post the Crawford and Usyk era. And in a way, even if his career ended today, he's someone that's a great fighter, but he just doesn't have enough A-grade level names, in my view, on his resume. So, I mean, we'll see what ends up happening, but, in a way, in my view, is going to have to fight guys like Nakatani and Bam Bam Rodriguez. And then if he moves up to 126, he is going to have to fight guys like Ball Figueroa, Robisi Ramirez, Angelo Leo, I believe, and some of these other guys, who's some other guys that I'm not mentioning? Bruce Shushu Carrington. He's going to have to fight all those guys.
It's hands down Terrence Crawford. The dude's been on the pound-for-pound list pretty much at number 1 for the last 10 years.
Well, no. That's where I have to stop you. Terrence Bud Crawford, in his first major fight in his career, I believe it was in 2015, and that was against Yuriorkis Gamboa. No. Sorry, sir, but Terrence Bud Crawford has not been the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter, nor has he deserved to be for 10 straight years. It is what it is. He's an all-time great level fighter, and he is, debatably the undisputed number 1 of this era. But no, he's not been number 1 for the past 10 years.
Dominating the sport. 3-time undisputed. Nobody has done those things. And to make it even better, he came up 3 weight classes to come be.
Well, I'm going to say more 2. And the reason why I state that is because, A, Terrence Bud Crawford had a fight at 154. And to be quite honest, after the way that I've seen Crawford handle it, I mean, it's not like he's overall some small welterweight. He's someone that, was rehydrating at 170. Even some of his fights, I believe, at welterweight. He's a big boy there. He's someone overall that's 74 inches of reach or 75 inches of reach. And he's a guy overall that, I believe is around 5'8", 5'9". A guy overall that, is around, 160 to 170 in terms of weight. You could definitely debate that he's a little bit more of a 154 pounder, but, I understand what the man's trying to say.
Canelo's best weight when he's the undisputed champion.
That also being stated, Canelo was not a natural super middleweight. And I've been stating this overall for a very long time. There's just no way. Canelo is someone that He's not very lengthy. He is not very tall. He's only 5'7.5" with about a 70-inch arm reach. He's not a super middleweight. Any fight that you ever seen him in the ring with against a true super middleweight, he was always smaller than. It just is what it is. And in no way is I me trying to diminish Crawford's achievements, because I still think that there was a difference in terms of weight overall in terms of Crawford, because he is around a natural welterweight in my view, and Canelo around a natural 160-pounder.
And Canelo Alvarez, coming into this fight, right, looked in incredible shape. Absolutely incredible shape. I even said on past videos that I have not seen Canelo Alvarez look this good in some time now. Like, physically.
I agree.
And in the ring, he was ripped up too. He may have not been the taller fighter, but he for sure was the little bit thicker fighter in that ring. More sturdy. And he had never lost at 168.
That definitely is a great point overall to mention. That being stated, I do think that it's very obvious that Canelo Alvarez, that, he was on the decline, for that of the past few years. I mean, it just is what it is, and it's whatever. But that being stated, Terence Crawford, of course, had a very troubling fight with Madrimov as well, so one could debate that he wasn't at his absolute peak either.
But going into this fight, everybody was, saying Canelo's going to knock him out. The weight jump's going to be too much for Crawford. Canelo's power is just going to be too much. Bud is going to tire out because he put on too much weight. There were so many things that were said.
And Crawford, in my personal view, did tire out a little bit more within this fight, but it was really more Canelo who tired out more, because he was not used to maneuvering in that way in such a long time. He was overall probably a bit too heavy himself, and then on top of that, I think Canelo thought that he'd be able to maneuver and get past his jab a little bit more, and once he seen that it wasn't going to be that easy, he knew that he was going to be in for it. Because when you take a look at, the Munguia fights and the Berlanga fights, although I believe this gentleman right here, he stated how he's seen how Canelo was tired. Canelo never appeared too tired to me in the Munguia fights, especially with how much that he threw. But, if we're also going to talk about it, Munguia was kind of running into a lot of shots. And it's easier when your opponent's kind of coming straight at you, when at times running into shots and, can be as hittable as that is a Munguia. So even when at times you're a little bit more tired, your punches overall may have a little bit more on them because your opponent is making it easier for them to be hit. So I mean, it just is what it is. But it was never going to be that easy with the Crawford, because he's a lot more maneuverable and he sets up traps to a greater degree. And of course, he had the length.
Into this fight, and I knew it, that Crawford would beat him, and there would be excuses. That's why I dropped YouTube shorts saying, what's Canelo's excuse going to be? And I named all the excuses from all the other notable fighters on Crawford's resume. And I said, what's going to be Canelo's excuse? But I've heard also from Robert Garcia, who kind of picked Terence Crawford. He was kind of going back and forth. Robert Garcia came out and said, maybe Canelo just didn't take him seriously. He didn't take...
I don't personally believe that whatsoever. Not with the way that Canelo Alvarez was coming into shape with this fight. Not with all the boxers, overall picking Terence Crawford to win. No, sorry. Canelo Alvarez looked overall in best form. And to be quite honest with you, I thought that he looked good in the first half of the fight. But in the second half of the fight, he just started getting more exhausted. And he still did relatively okay. He wasn't someone that, in my view, did horrible. It's not like Crawford was just whooping his ass, the same way, say, like, he was doing at the Spence. But, I mean, the point overall is that Canelo just was not, able to get past that reach, nor that jab, nor was he able to get past that ability.
Small Terence Crawford that series, maybe that's why he lost. That's BS, because you're fighting the best fighter in boxing. The pound-for-pound best fighter in the sport. You're not going to take him serious? And it's clear that he did take him serious, because he came in phenomenal shape.
Agreed.
He brought in Jerome Boots Ennis into his camp to help prepare him for Terence Crawford, right? And everybody made a big deal about that, saying, oh, it's over now. He brought in Boots to help him train. That's just a younger, better Crawford, right? All the things that were said about that whole, situation of Boots coming into camp with Canelo. And to make matters even worse for Canelo, his own trainer, Eddie Reynoso, when they did the grand arrivals, said, you're going to see the best Canelo you've seen ever of the last 20.
Right, but come on, we all know that every coach overall does that. Every coach overall, no matter at one point in time the fighter is in their career, they could lose 3 fights in a row, and the coach will say, "You're going to see the best fighter overall that you've ever seen because we really trained for this fight." So, I mean, I'm not really going to use that as a case in point.
Years, and Canelo's career has been 20 years, right? So he pretty much said, we're going to see the best Canelo Alvarez we've ever seen. There's just endless excuses for Terence Crawford. And I had listened to some UK guys, I forget the name of their show. One of them is a prominent commentator over there. I just don't know their names. I've seen them around quite a bit. But they had something interesting to say, and I didn't agree with everything that I saw in that video. But one of the things that, caught my attention was one of the gentlemen on that show said the way the American media was characterizing this fight for Crawford was as if his legacy would be defined by this fight. If he loses, then that's legacy defining for Terence Crawford.
Well, yes, it was going to be legacy defining for both fighters. At the end of the day, when you have a fight like this, similar to Tyson Fury versus Usyk, or similar to Sugar Ray Leonard versus a Marvin Hagler, even if one clearly does have a size advantage, when you two are looked at as both the creme de la creme or debatably the best of your generation, yes, it was going to be legacy defining. It just is what it is. It wasn't ever going to destroy either their careers to completion, but at the end of the day, whoever lost this fight was probably never going to be debated as the best of their era. It just is what it is. Now, of course, people would say, well, that's not fair to Crawford because he was moving up multiple weight classes. And yes, he was. But the problem also with Crawford is that many people overall, they take a look at his resume and they know that it's just a little bit thin. It just is what it is.
No, you're talking about a 4-division champion, a 2-time undisputed champion, right? That had to move up 2 weight classes to fight the undisputed super middleweight champion.
Right, but once again, people also knew that Canelo Alvarez, he's not really a super middleweight. He's really more of a middleweight fighter. It is what it is. So at the end of the day, this fight was comparable, overall to certain fights like Sugar Ray Leonard versus Marvin Hagler. It just is what it is, or a Duran versus Leonard. So Crawford was going to have to win this if he was going to be put on their level, and of course he did. So congratulations to him. As for Canelo Alvarez, I don't think that he can be quite put on their level ever again. You could still debate him as the greatest Mexican fighter of all time, because to be quite honest with you, there's never been a Mexican fighter, in my personal view, that ever accomplished the same things that a Duran or the same things that a Leonard did. But the point overall is that, Canelo can never be, overall remembered on the same level, in my view, as a Leonard or that as a Duran.
Right.
And the reason why that is because Leonard was able to beat Hagler. I believe that he also was able to become a super middleweight champion, of the world, and I believe even possibly a light heavyweight champion of the world. Canelo Alvarez, of course, was able to do those things as well. But when he fought, Bivol, Mayweather, and Crawford, he ended up losing all 3 of those fights. So, I mean, it just is what it is.
Really, like I said, you could say 3. He only fought 1 time at 154. So, I can't imagine that the whole boxing media all over the U.S., they would all be bashing Crawford if he lost this fight.
Well, of course, at the end of the day, it turns about Crawford, and I'm not claiming overall that was 100% right of them to do, but like I said, what most people do overall when it comes down to it, they don't take a look at reality. They only take a look overall at your wins and at your losses. They don't always take a look at certain things. They don't care overall if you moved up multiple weight classes. They don't give a shit. They take a look at it, and they care overall whether you win or lose. And I'm not claiming that that's the exact correct way overall to judge this fight, but that's how most people just take a look at things.
Say that he lost to a fighter for the first time, or they would say something along the lines of the first time he fights an elite fighter, he loses. See?
That's absolutely overall what they would have said, which is why this was so important for Terence Bud Crawford, because narrative carries for years upon years upon years, even if it's not really that true. I've seen overall with football players and NBA players, I've seen it with so many different types of people. Narrative can carry, depending on one event at times for 10 to 20 years, depending on what you were able to win or what you lost. So at the end of the day, this was extremely important for Crawford, especially because if he ended up losing to Crawford, what the debate would have been is that see you finally fight a peak level fighter, overall it's someone that's an all-time great and you get your ass kicked. That's exactly what the narrative would have been. And of course for Canelo, what the narrative is now going to be is that every time that you fought, an elite level fighter that you lost. Now, of course, that's not necessarily true because he still beat guys like Lara and Golovkin and, overall Kovalev and certain other guys like that, Danny Jacobs, yada, yada, yada. But the point overall is that for Crawford, it possibly would have been, pretty much career ending. He would have never been put on the level of guys like Sugar Ray Leonard or those guys. But as for Canelo Alvarez, of course, this does a lot of damage to his career as well.
He never really was that good, even though he had to go up multiple weight classes to fight him, right? But guess what? He schooled him. He absolutely schooled him. It was not even a competitive fight.
Well, I actually thought that it was a competitive fight, but it wasn't competitive enough to say that Canelo Alvarez won the fight or anything like that. I thought that Crawford, clearly won the fight, but I thought that it was competitive. The punch stats were relatively close, but the point is that Crawford he just overall was better. He threw more. He handled the weight, a lot better than I think what Canelo Alvarez expected, and Canelo just was not able to do anything.
The most rounds you could really give Canelo in that fight were 3 rounds.
I gave him about 4.
If you're being completely honest.
I thought that the commentary team, to be quite honest with you, was a little bit biased with certain fighters all night. Don't get it twisted. I'm not claiming that, I thought that Canelo Alvarez, that he won or anything, but I thought that Canelo won a little bit more, or at least won 4 rounds in the fight.
It wasn't competitive.
But it wasn't competitive to the point to where, obviously, you could debate that it was that close. I thought that Crawford clearly won.
It really wasn't. But it's just crazy how far, the excuses run for whoever Crawford fights. They're never going to give this dude, the credit he deserves. They're never going to give him props. And it's been like this for years and years, pretty much his whole entire career. So again, like I said, it's not surprising at all. But those are my thoughts, man. Let me know what you guys thought. Do you think we're going to hear more Canelo excuses? And what's your take on it?
Well, we're always going to hear quote-unquote Canelo Alvarez excuses, But I mean, to be fair, with any big level fighter like a Canelo Alvarez, someone that especially has such a big face and someone overall that has such a big fan base, we're always going to hear quote-unquote excuses with them. And we would have heard, excuses with Terrence Bud Crawford as well. So, I mean, the point overall is that that's just how it is. That's how most people are, especially if they're fans.
Do you guys really think Crawford shot Canelo Alvarez? Let me know.
I don't think that he fought a shot Canelo Alvarez. I think that he fought a Canelo that was on his last legs. But that being stated, overall, that still was a Canelo that was very dangerous and was an A-plus level fighter, in my personal view. I mean, we'll see, within the next coming fights. But Canelo, it's going to be hard to judge because Canelo may not mentally be the same fighter after this fight. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, that being stated, that pretty much is about it. Do I believe that Canelo was shot? I mean, I definitely don't believe that he was at his peak or in his prime. But that being stated, I think that they were at comparable points in their career, to state overall that it still counts for something. This fight overall, in my view, is very similar to Mike Tyson versus Holyfield, to where you could kind of debate that Holyfield and Tyson that they had been through it in certain things. And of course, people would say that, oh, Tyson wasn't in his prime and blah, 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 right? But Tyson was still a champion. He was someone that was heavily favored to win, So, I mean, this is also similar to Leonard versus Hagler, where many people would say that Hagler was not the same, but I don't know if Leonard was completely either. So that's kind of what this fight is comparable enough to me. If maybe Canelo was younger, like the Canelo that I had seen against Danny Jacobs or some of those guys, could he maybe have won this fight? It's possible. Of course, I would have given more of a chance. But I mean, the point is that we'll just never know. But one thing we do know is that when they finally did fight at comparable points in their career, Canelo clearly lost the fight. And it is what it is. So he can never be remembered as the best of this generation. It just is what it is. The only 2 fighters, as of right now, in my view, that could be the debatable best of their generation are Crawford and Usyk when you compare the whole package. Canelo has to be a level below them. That's just how it is. And of course, certain people would mention Inoue, but A, I think that Inoue is a little bit, past their generation, first of all. And B, I think that he needs to do a little bit more work in terms of A-grade level names. But that being stated, we'll see what ends up happening. But that pretty much is about it for today. Congrats to this gentleman right here, of course, for getting this fight prediction correct. But that being stated, thought that was very interesting. But that's pretty much about it for today. Thank y'all so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later.